Okay, so Chapter 11, Part 2. Keep in mind that in the last presentation we made note that as companies grow, as they succeed, it makes things more complicated, right? Managers, operators can't deal with everything, and so the structure has to evolve to reflect and handle that complexity. So we're going to talk about the bottom of that flow chart, which is the multidivisional structure. And within the multidivisional structure, there are three variations. There is the cooperative form, the strategic business unit form, and the competitive form. And these three forms are based on the degree that diversification in the company is either related or unrelated. Okay, with highly related diversification, the cooperative form makes the most sense because you want the different divisions cooperating with each other when the different products are very similar, when they're related to one another. Hopefully that makes sense to you, right? If you're selling similar things, there are going to be similar resources and capabilities that are going to be able to share. Knowledge transfer, communication transfer is going to be very beneficial. Lots of reasons to cooperate when products you're selling are similar. There is the strategic business unit form. This a lot of times is a very large organization that has similar products in one area and another group of similar products like in another industry. And there's like, but amongst those different groups, there aren't many similarities. And so these companies form strategic business units. They have multiple divisions within a business unit, and then they have multiple business units. Okay, so that is when there is related diversification between some products, but unrelated diversification between groups of products. All right, the third one is the competitive form, and that's when you just have unrelated diversification, when your products just don't have very many similarities. There aren't many economies of scale that can be gained. There's just not much synergy there. And so with the competitive form, there's not cooperation. In fact, there's the opposite of cooperation between the business units. In that form, in the competitive form, there's competition. All right, so it doesn't say it in the title, but this is the cooperative form. You see that on the heading there beside figure 11.5. But this is the structure that is good for implementing a related constrained strategy. And related means related diversification. I'm going to read the notes and comment on them a little bit. But basically, you've got structural integration devices that create tight links among all divisions. You want all the different divisions working very closely together. You've got government affairs and legal affairs up here at the top kind of overseeing things, but the action is happening at lower levels of the company primarily. R&D, though, is very likely to be centralized, so it says corporate R&D lab. These functions are all working together and informing what goes on at the product division level. Rewards are subjective and tend to emphasize overall corporate performance in addition to divisional performance. The reason for that is that we don't want our divisions competing with each other. We want them generating profit, but we also want them generating knowledge and other resources that can be used by the organization as a whole. And so, when they cooperate, we want them to make decisions that aren't just benefiting their product division, but that are beneficial to the organization as a whole. The culture emphasizes cooperative sharing. And so note like those hyphenated lines between the product divisions. That is to show you that these organizations are communicating and they're all linked together. Okay, so that's the cooperative form of the multidivisional structure. The one in the middle is called the strategic business unit form. All right, and it's good for implementing a related linked strategy. In other words, there are related strategies, related product groups that are fit together, and those are linked. But then there are some that aren't. And the strategic business units, the company is divided into strategic business units. So in this diagram, we have 3 different strategic business units, and they would be selling dissimilar products from one another, right? Within each business unit, the divisions, though, are very much linked together. So we've got structural integration among each division, but we've got sharing within each division, right? Strategic planning may be the most prominent function for headquarters for managing the strategic planning approval process of SBUs. That's what the president does. Each SBU unit may have its own budget for staff to foster integration. So there's a lot of power in each of these strategic business units, because of, again, limits to what one person can do. The overall leader of the organization is not going to micromanage each individual business unit, but they're going to leave those decisions to the head of those business units. And finally, corporate headquarters staff members serve as consultants to the strategic business units and divisions rather than having direct input on product strategy. So in the cooperative form, you've got more centralized planning and more direct input. Here, they're just more advising and focusing more on big picture aspects. Maybe they might have some veto power, but in general, they're not formulating the strategy. That's done at the business unit level. Okay, so finally we have the competitive form, and this is when the strategies are unrelated. So at the top we have basically some pieces of the organization that are just in charge of oversight. You can almost think of this analogously, and a good example is Berkshire Hathaway, of an organization that has lots of different businesses. The businesses don't have much to do with one another, and yet the leadership at the top is, overseeing all of them, right? Acting on behalf of the stakeholders to oversee all of them. But basically what we have at the top, and you see they're not even really closely linked to what is going on in the divisions. What's going on at the top is just like oversight type functions. So we've got a legal team, we work on finance, we work on auditing to make sure we're in compliance with everything, make sure that each division is managing their resources well, to kind of compare the divisions with one another and to kind of foster that competition. But in terms of the business level strategy, the business level decisions, basically nothing. You're not getting involved at that from the top. All right. So corporate headquarters tends to be a small staff with very limited type roles, financing, auditing, that kind of thing. Divisions are independent and separate so that they can be evaluated separately. They retain strategic control, but again, cash, because of the way it's set up, is managed by the corporate office. And one important note is that the divisions are actually competing for corporate resources, right? So the best performing divisions are going to get more resources. The worst performing divisions might get divested, right? They might be seen as a stock that's underperforming. So they might get divested. They might get sent home, right? So that is a multi-divisional strategy for implementing an unrelated multi-divisional structure. I'm sorry, for implementing an unrelated strategy. Okay, the final organizational structure we're going to look at is the matrix structure. And the matrix structure it came up with a unique answer to solving the problem of bounded rationality for the CEO. And that was to have fields of expertise, and where these fields intersect, and where those interests are within the organization, we're going to have people in the organization answer to multiple managers. All right, so the way this works on this one, this is Pfizer. We have a research chief scientist, we have a vice president for sales, a vice president for engineering, and a vice president for finance and accounting. So that's arranged functionally. We've also got products. So there's Viagra, Zoloft, and Celebrex, different products. And then we have people here that are going to answer to multiple people, right? So we have scientist A is going to answer to Viagra project manager A, as well as vice president research chief scientist here. And then this is two-dimensional. You could actually add a third-dimensional geographic region and make it a true matrix. Well, make it a matrix with 3 dimensions, and they could answer to a country manager as well, which some organizations have done. And so the good part of this was that we have like the expertise, right? So we need the scientist A needs to communicate and needs to have knowledge that comes from the project manager for this product. They also need to have a good relationship with R&D, the head of R&D, the chief scientist. Both of those things are true. So by setting up things up in a matrix, we can kind of solve that problem. The problem with the matrix organization are kind of what you can imagine. It's very complex, and there are competing interests, right? And so the decision-making process tends to slow down as like the 2 supervisors of scientist A, discuss things. And that's true at every level. And so it's very hard to resolve a problem without it going up to the highest level of the organization. And so what the CEO serves to do in these organizations a lot of times is settle disputes, right? And so let's say sales detailer B has a problem with, there's a question that comes up in how to distribute Zoloft, and the Zoloft project manager has some ideas maybe related to safety. The vice president of sales may be trying to boost the volume of sales no matter what, and there's a trade-off there. So what does sales detailer B do? Well, he or she reports to both of these managers, and they find out that there's a dispute, a conflict, and that has to go up to the top level, to the CEO. And so disputes, conflicts in the organization tend to rise up to the highest levels of the organizations due to the organizational complexity and the dual reporting relationships. Now, the matrix structure isn't all bad. In terms of the ability to share knowledge and communicate, it's actually pretty good, and there are still organizations that use a matrix structure, but it is infamous for a few of these problems. All right, so that's the last structure we're going to talk about. So we've talked about different ways companies organize themselves. We've talked about 3 major dimensions, which are, sorry, I drew a blank on the first one, specialization, centralization, and formalization. And we said that the higher those 3 levels, higher the levels of those 3 things are, the more geared the organization is to be efficient and to do a cost leadership type strategy. We've also looked at the way that the degree of diversification impacts the structure of organizations. So hopefully you can see at least some of the ways. We've kind of only got the tip of the iceberg in terms of structure, but you can see some of the ways that your strategy choice is going to impact your structure, and then once you have a structure, it's going to constrain that strategy choice and future strategy choices.